I never imagined that my life's worth would be reduced to a few lines read aloud in a stuffy law office. The air smelled faintly of old leather and stale coffee, and the ticking of the wall clock made every second feel like a hammer strike against my chest. I sat there, gripping the armrests of a chair that creaked beneath my weight, waiting to hear what my ex-wife had written in her will. Across the long mahogany table, my son, Dustin, leaned back with the kind of smugness that made my stomach twist. He looked like a man who had already won, his lips curled into a smirk I didn't recognize, the kind that made him look less like my son and more like a stranger. He tilted his head toward me and whispered, just loud enough for only me to hear, "You're not getting a dime, Dad. You divorced her. You walked away. Don't expect her to reward you for it." The words hit harder than I expected. I clenched my jaw, trying to hold back the sting. My voice came out quieter than I intended. Conversations became transactions, bills, schedules, household logistics. Sometimes I'd look across the dinner table and feel like I was staring at a colleague instead of a wife. I don't know when I first noticed the silence between us. Maybe it was the night I poured 2 glasses of wine, waiting for her to get home, only to fall asleep alone on the couch. Maybe it was the morning I woke up and realized I couldn't remember the last time we laughed together. We didn't end with a fight. There were no screaming matches, no broken plates, just erosion. One day we were us, and the next we were 2 people occupying the same house, sharing the same child, living entirely separate lives. When we finally sat down with the papers, she looked at me with tired eyes and said, "You deserve someone who wants the same things you do." I wanted to argue, to tell her that what I wanted was her. But the truth was, she was right. She wanted the world. I just wanted my family. We divorced quietly, almost politely, like 2 business partners dissolving a contract. Dustin was 18 then, caught between us, though I thought we handled it well. We split holidays, birthdays, milestones. I never spoke badly about her, never poisoned his image of his mother, and despite the pain, I still respected her. She had built an empire from nothing, and no matter what happened between us, I would never deny her brilliance. But looking back now, sitting in that law office, I realized something bitter. Dustin hadn't inherited my values of sacrifice. He'd inherited her hunger for more. And while Brianna's ambition built, Dustin's greed consumed. I thought our divorce was an ending, but in truth, it was the beginning of something much darker. Because whatever distance grew between Brianna and me, we both still loved Dustin. We both still wanted to believe he'd honor the foundation we gave him. What I didn't see, what I refused to see, was that our separation had given him room to play us against each other, to twist words, to manipulate emotions. That realization stung almost as much as the divorce itself. My pulse quickened as I remembered the last conversation Brianna and I ever had about Dustin, her voice low, uncertain, as if she feared something I couldn't yet see. Back then, I brushed it off. Now, I wondered if that was the warning I'd been too blind to hear. When Dustin was little, he used to cling to my leg whenever I came home from work. "Daddy's here!" he'd shout, running through the hallway with his arms wide open. I can still feel the weight of him when I scooped him up, the way he'd bury his face in my neck, breathing fast like he'd been holding his breath until I walked through that door. I never thought those tiny arms could grow into the hands that would one day shove me away. The fractures didn't appear all at once. They came in hairline cracks, small moments I ignored, thinking they'd pass. It started with the way he handled money. At 16, I gave him his first debit card linked to a small account I'd set up for him. I wanted him to learn responsibility, budgeting, independence. Within a month, the balance was gone. Sneakers, video games, fast food runs with friends. "Son," I told him, showing him the statement, "money doesn't grow on trees." His response wasn't the sheepish apology I expected. Instead, he shrugged and said, "Well, it grows in your wallet, doesn't it?" I laughed nervously at the time, chalking it up to teenage immaturity. But inside, something cold twisted in me. By college, the cracks had widened. He'd call at odd hours asking for a little extra because books were expensive, or his car needed repairs. I always sent the money, sometimes more than he asked, telling myself that this was what fathers did. But then I'd see photos on social media, expensive dinners, weekend trips, the latest gadgets. When I questioned him, he'd roll his eyes. "Come on, Dad, don't be so dramatic. You've got it. Why shouldn't I?" The first time I heard that tone, entitled, dismissive. I felt like I was talking to a stranger. After Brianna and I divorced, those cracks became canyons. He learned quickly how to play us against each other. To me, he'd say, "Mom never has time for me. You're the only one who cares." To her, he'd whine, "Dad won't help me out. You know how cheap he is." And we fell for it, both of us. Each of us trying to make up for the other, showering him with more than he needed, more than was good for him. One night, when he was home from college, I found him in the garage, rifling through some of my old boxes. "What are you looking for?" I asked. He didn't even flinch. "Stuff I can sell. You've got all this junk lying around. Might as well make some money off it." I stared at him, stunned. Those boxes weren't junk. They were memories, tools from my father, keepsakes from when Brianna and I first started out, old photo albums. "Those aren't yours," I said quietly. He smirked. "Neither is Mom's money, but you sure want that, don't you?" The words stung in ways I can't describe. It wasn't just the insult. It was the coldness behind it, the absence of respect, of gratitude, of love. I wanted to believe he was just young, just reckless. That time would smooth his edges. That maturity would bring him back to the boy who once hugged me like I was his whole world. But sitting in that law office years later, watching him grin as he waited for my humiliation, I realized the truth. Those cracks had never healed. They'd only spread until the son I loved had been replaced by a man I hardly recognized. And then I remembered the last words Brianna ever spoke to me about Dustin, just weeks before she died. "Something's wrong with him. He's not the boy we raised." At the time, I brushed it off as stress. But now her voice haunted me like a prophecy. The lawyer shuffled the pages, his expression tightening as if he didn't quite want to read what came next. He cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses, and then spoke carefully, almost apologetically. "Mrs. Flores left instructions regarding her final concerns about family relationships." A chill ran through me. My palms went clammy, my throat constricted. Final concerns. Those words carried weight. I leaned forward, every muscle tense. Dustin, on the other hand, practically vibrated with anticipation. His smile spread wider, as if he already knew what was coming. The lawyer continued, voice steady. "In her final weeks, Brianna expressed doubt about the sincerity of certain visits. She believed that her former husband might have been motivated by financial interests rather than affection." My heart stopped. For a moment, the room went utterly silent, except for the pounding in my ears. I stared at the lawyer, my mouth open but no words coming out. "What?" I whispered. Dustin didn't wait a second. He leaned across the table, his voice dripping with venom. "See, even Mom knew the truth. You weren't there for her. You were there for the money. I told her that." The words slammed into me like a physical blow. My vision blurred. My own son, my flesh and blood, had poisoned her against me in her final days. I could picture it so clearly. Brianna, frail in her hospital bed, her sharp mind dulled by pain and medication, and Dustin whispering lies into her ear. Lies that would fester, take root, and replace decades of history with suspicion and bitterness. "No," I croaked, shaking my head. "That's not true. I never—" "Don't bother denying it," Dustin said coldly. "I told her you only came around because you knew she was dying, and you wanted a piece of the estate, and she believed me. She died thinking you were a leech." I gasped, my chest tightening until it hurt to breathe. Brianna and I may have divorced, but I had never stopped respecting her, never stopped caring in my own way. And to think that her final memory of me had been twisted, tarnished by the son I once carried in my arms. It broke something inside me. I slammed my hand on the table, the sound echoing through the room. "Why would you do that, Dustin? Why would you make her believe such a lie?" His smirk didn't falter. "Because it was the truth she needed to hear. You abandoned her, Dad, and now she's abandoned you back." The lawyer looked uneasy, but he pressed on, reading the lines Brianna had dictated. While I valued the years Jerry and I shared, I could not ignore the feeling that his presence near the end was not genuine. This weighed heavily on me. My chest burned, my hands shook. That wasn't her voice. That wasn't the Brianna I knew. That was Dustin's poison, his manipulation, dripping into her heart at its weakest moment. I turned to him, my voice breaking. "She loved me once. She respected me, even after the divorce. You stole that from her. You stole her peace." Dustin leaned back, folding his arms casually. She was already dying. Peace or no peace, it didn't matter. What matters is what's left. And it's mine. For the first time since I'd walked into that office, I wasn't just hurt. I was furious. A slow, deep fury that curled in my gut like fire catching dry wood. I had accepted our divorce. I had even accepted the cracks in my relationship with Dustin. But this was unforgivable. To rob Brianna of comfort in her last days, to stain the memory of everything we'd once shared. It wasn't just betrayal. It was cruelty of the worst kind. And yet, even as my rage swelled, a small voice inside me whispered something else. If Dustin could do this to his own mother, what else was he capable of? My son had not only betrayed me, he had desecrated his mother's memory. "Dustin, today's about honoring your mother. Don't what?" He cut me off, his eyes glinting with cruel amusement. "Don't tell the truth? You left her. You left us. You have no right to her legacy. And today, everyone's going to see that." My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the storm building in my chest. I remembered the nights I worked 2 jobs so Brianna could finish her MBA. I remembered carrying Dustin in my arms while she chased deadlines, rocking him to sleep with stories I made up just to see him smile. Every sacrifice I made, every choice to put them first, was now being rewritten as abandonment. The lawyer, an older man with thinning hair and rimless glasses, cleared his throat. His tone was firm, professional. "Gentlemen, I ask that we keep this civil. These proceedings are difficult enough as they are." Silence followed, broken only by the sound of his fountain pen, scratching notes on paper. My pulse was racing so hard I could hear it in my ears. And as I stared into his cold, unflinching eyes, one truth chilled me to the bone. I no longer knew the man sitting across from me. The room felt smaller by the second, like the walls were inching closer, pressing the air out of my lungs. My hands were still trembling from Dustin's confession, but the lawyer's voice dragged me back to the present. He cleared his throat and began to read the will in earnest. Regarding the distribution of my estate, his tone was even, measured, as if he'd read these words 100 times before, but each syllable hit me like a gavel. He listed charities first, millions allocated to educational programs, scholarships, and healthcare initiatives. It sounded exactly like Brianna, generous, forward-thinking, committed to leaving the world better than she found it. My heart ached with pride and grief all at once. But as name after name appeared, foundations, organizations, distant cousins, I waited for mine. My pulse quickened with each omission. Jerry Flores. The name never came. Then I saw it, the way Dustin shifted in his seat. He leaned forward slightly, his smirk widening with every line that excluded me. He was savoring it, the way a predator savors the moment before the kill. Beneficiary, Dustin Flores. The lawyer said it so matter-of-factly, but the words cracked through me like a whip. My son's name, tied to everything Brianna had built. He sat up straighter, puffing out his chest, as if the crown had just been placed on his head. I felt eyes on me, family friends, old business acquaintances of Brianna's. They didn't speak, but I could feel their pity radiating across the table. The divorcee, the ex-husband, the man who would leave empty-handed. My cheeks burned hot. Dustin tilted his head toward me, his voice low but sharp enough to cut. "Told you, Dad. You don't exist here. Not anymore." I wanted to shout, to slam my fist on the table and remind him that without me, there would be no firm, no empire, no Dustin sitting there in an expensive suit. But my voice stuck. All I could do was stare at him. This boy I once cradled, who now looked at me like a stranger he couldn't wait to destroy. The lawyer kept reading, his words blurring into a dull hum. Dustin's smirk didn't fade. If anything, it grew with every passing sentence. He leaned back again, crossing his arms, basking in the glow of what he thought was total victory. But then, something changed. The lawyer stopped. He adjusted his glasses again, hesitating as if deciding whether to continue. He picked up a smaller envelope from the stack, sealed, different from the rest. He tapped it against the table once before sliding a finger under the flap. Dustin frowned, his smirk faltering for the first time all day. The lawyer's voice grew quieter, deliberate. And finally, regarding the contingency clause, a ripple of unease swept through the room. I felt it in my chest, in the sudden silence that fell as even the air seemed to hold its breath. Dustin shifted again, his leg bouncing under the table. "What clause?" he demanded. The lawyer ignored him, unfolding the paper slowly, carefully, as if it carried the weight of dynamite. My heart thudded against my ribs. For the first time since walking into that office, I saw something flicker in my son's eyes. Not confidence, not arrogance, but fear. The lawyer's next words would change everything. Dustin thought the will was his coronation. He didn't realize it was about to become his trial. The lawyer unfolded the sealed paper with slow, deliberate care, as though even he understood its importance. The room was so silent I could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent light above us. Dustin sat rigid now, his smugness replaced by irritation. "This isn't necessary," Dustin snapped. "Mom already made her wishes clear. Why drag this out?" The lawyer didn't flinch. He adjusted his glasses, glanced at me briefly, and then began. "Per the instructions of Brianna Elizabeth Flores, this clause is to be read only after the primary estate allocations. It is contingent upon the conduct of certain beneficiaries, specifically her son, Dustin Flores." Dustin's head jerked toward him. "What?" The lawyer continued, his voice steady but firm. "If it is found that Dustin Flores has attempted to manipulate me during my final illness, misrepresent his father's intentions, or interfere with the lawful execution of my estate, his share shall be null and void. In such case, the estate, both assets and holdings, shall be transferred to my ex-husband, Jerry Flores, as the only beneficiary I trust to act with integrity." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. I froze, every muscle locking in place. Did I hear that correctly? Brianna trusted me? After everything, the divorce, the distance, the years apart, she had still written my name. She had still chosen me. A murmur rippled through the room. A few people shifted in their seats. The weight of the revelation was crushing, but in a way I couldn't yet describe. It was as if hope had been cracked open, but only just enough to glimpse the light. Dustin, meanwhile, exploded. He slammed his hand against the table, rattling glasses of water. "This is ridiculous! Mom would never—" "She did," the lawyer interrupted, sharper now. These were her direct words, signed, notarized, and sealed to prevent interference. I can provide copies to all present. I turned to look at my son. The color had drained from his face, replaced by a flush of red creeping up his neck. He was sputtering, grasping for control, but the mask of certainty he had worn all day was gone. And in that moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the boy who lied about breaking the neighbor's window, who swore it wasn't his fault when he failed a class, who always found someone else to blame. Only now, the stakes weren't broken glass or bad grades. It was $34 million. I spoke before I even realized the words were leaving me. My voice was steady, low. "You told her lies about me, didn't you? You poisoned her against me to make yourself look better." His eyes shot to mine, wide and furious. "You don't deserve a damn thing." The lawyer raised his hand. "Gentlemen, please, we are not finished." But for me, everything had shifted. The humiliation, the dread, the shame. They cracked under the weight of something new. Anger, yes, but also resolve. This clause wasn't just Brianna's final act of fairness, it was a chance. A weapon I hadn't expected to have, and I wasn't about to waste it. I leaned back slowly, my heartbeat steadying. For the first time that day, I felt the ground tilt in my favor. Dustin might have believed he'd won before the game even started, but he hadn't counted on this. He hadn't counted on his own mother preparing for his betrayal. The lawyer set the clause on the table, its ink still sharp and black, undeniable. Dustin was unraveling, and for the first time since walking into that office, I knew. The battle had just begun. After the lawyer finished reading the contingency clause, the air in the room changed. The spectators, once quiet witnesses to my humiliation, now shifted uncomfortably, whispering to each other. The pitying glances I'd endured were gone, replaced with curiosity and suspicion directed at Dustin. I sat there, stunned but steady. A part of me wanted to savor his unraveling, but another part knew this was just the beginning. A clause was only as strong as the proof behind it. Without evidence, it was just words on paper. The lawyer cleared his throat again. I must also disclose that Mrs. Flores left us with documentation she considered relevant. Records, statements, things she requested I review if any disputes arose. Dustin paled. What kind of records? The lawyer didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into a folder and pulled out a stack of papers, bound neatly with a clip. He laid them on the table with a soft thud that echoed louder than any shout. Bank statements. My eyes flicked over the top page. Transfers, large ones, tens of thousands at a time. The lawyer's voice was calm, almost clinical. Over the course of her final 6 months, $400,000 was withdrawn from Brianna's personal accounts under the label of medical expenses. I frowned. Medical? She had insurance. Her treatments were covered. The lawyer nodded gravely. Exactly. He turned the page and slid it toward me. The next line told the real story. Luxury auto dealerships, high-end retailers, casino transactions. I looked up sharply, my chest burning. You mean to tell me? Yes, the lawyer said, his voice heavy with certainty. Dustin authorized these transfers. He claimed they were for his mother's care, but the money was spent elsewhere. Personal indulgences, gambling, cars. Gasps rippled through the room. A few people murmured her name like a prayer. Brianna. I turned to my son, my voice shaking but loud enough for all to hear. You stole from her, from your own mother, while she was dying. Dustin's eyes darted, desperate, his smirk long gone. That's not true. She gave me permission. She wanted me to have it. She said... The lawyer cut him off sharply. The authorization signatures don't match her handwriting. Independent analysis confirms it. Forged. The word hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. I stared at him, my stomach lurching. My son hadn't just manipulated Brianna emotionally. He had bled her dry financially, taking what he could while she was too weak to fight back. I forced myself to glance at Dustin again, hoping, praying for a flicker of the boy I once knew. But all I saw was arrogance, confidence, certainty that his father was about to be humiliated in front of the entire room. Everything I did was for this family, I muttered, more to myself than to him. Dustin snorted. Family? You abandoned that word the moment you left Mom. Don't pretend you deserve a piece of what she built. I swallowed hard, fighting the lump in my throat. Maybe I should have shouted back. Maybe I should have reminded him of the tuition I paid, the roof I kept over his head, the countless nights I sacrificed sleep so he could have a better life. But the words stuck, heavy and useless. The lawyer began reading the first section of Brianna's will. My name wasn't there, not once, not in the opening statements, not in the initial distributions. My palms grew damp against the leather of the chair. Memories flooded me. Nights when she called, sounding tired but still hopeful. I think Dustin's finally stepping up, she'd said once. He's been helping with the bills, taking care of things for me. The bile rose in my throat. She hadn't known. She'd trusted him, and he'd turned that trust into his personal piggy bank. You didn't just lie to her, I said slowly, my voice hardening with every syllable. You robbed her. You robbed your own mother while she was fighting for her life. He slammed his fists on the table, his voice cracking. You don't understand. I deserved it. After everything you and she put me through, I deserved it. I leaned in, my eyes locked on his. For the first time, I didn't see a son. I saw a predator, a selfish, desperate man who would justify anything, even exploiting the woman who gave him life. The lawyer gathered the papers and set them neatly aside. This is only the beginning. The forensic accountant will testify to these findings. We have witnesses as well, nurses, staff. They'll confirm what Mrs. Flores suspected. Dustin's mask shattered, sweat beaded on his forehead, his breathing left fast and uneven. The room's attention had shifted completely. Every eye was on him now. And for me, the shame I'd carried all morning dissolved into something far stronger. Not just anger, righteous fury. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about justice. For Brianna, for the years I'd given, for the truth that had been twisted by the one person who should have honored it most. As the bank statements burned in my hands, I felt the last pieces of denial fall away. My son wasn't misguided. He wasn't confused. He was a thief, and I swore then and there I would make him answer for it. The lawyer's words still echoed in the room, the evidence sitting like a mountain on the polished table. Dustin was cornered, and he knew it. His face was red, his jaw tight, his leg bouncing uncontrollably beneath the desk. For a fleeting second, I thought he might crumble. I thought the truth might finally break him. But then, something darker slipped across his features. A flash of the same smugness I'd seen earlier, but twisted, desperate. He leaned closer to me, his voice low, venomous, meant only for my ears. "You think this changes anything?" he hissed. "I'll destroy you before I let you take a cent." I stared at him, stunned. "You've already destroyed enough." He smiled then, a cruel, calculated smile that chilled me more than his anger. "If you fight me on this, I'll tell the grandkids everything. I'll make sure they grow up knowing you abandoned their grandmother when she was dying. I'll make sure they hate you the way she did." My stomach dropped. His words were sharper than any blade. He wasn't just threatening me. He was threatening to poison the one bond I still cherished. My grandchildren. Innocent children who looked at me with love, who still believed their grandfather hung the moon. "You wouldn't," I whispered. But even as I said it, I knew he would. "Oh, I would," he sneered. "They'll spit on your name, Dad. They'll see you as the greedy, selfish man you are. And when they ask why I got everything and you got nothing, I'll tell them the truth, my truth, and they'll believe me. They always do." My heart hammered against my ribs, harder than it had all day. I wanted to lash out, to silence him, to make him take it back. But his words weren't just threats. They were a declaration, a line drawn in the sand. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This wasn't even just about Brianna. Dustin was telling me, to my face, that he would burn everything I had left, my name, my memory, my family, just to keep his stolen crown. The lawyer looked up from his papers, frowning at our hushed tones. "Is there a problem?" I forced myself to lean back, swallowing the rage clawing up my throat. "No," I said flatly, though my hands shook under the table. But inside, a fire was spreading. I realized then that there was no going back. I couldn't walk away, couldn't forgive, couldn't hope he'd come to his senses. Dustin had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. He wasn't bluffing. He would turn my grandchildren against me, robbing me of the last shred of dignity I had. And I couldn't let that happen. I looked at him, this son of mine, this stranger I no longer recognized, and felt something shift inside me. The guilt, the self-doubt, the endless questioning of where I'd gone wrong as a father. It all hardened into resolve. "Do what you have to," I murmured, my voice low, steady, cold. "But understand this, Dustin. You've made your last threat." He blinked, startled by the tone. Maybe for the first time, he realized I wasn't the weak, apologetic man he thought I was. The lawyer resumed reading, the formalities continuing, but I barely heard him. My mind was already racing ahead, toward evidence, toward strategy, toward justice. Dustin thought he could use lies to destroy me, but lies crumble under truth, and I was done being silent. Dustin thought his threats would break me. Instead, they lit a fire I hadn't felt in years. He wanted war, and I was ready to give him one. The meeting adjourned in uneasy silence. Dustin stormed out of the office, his face twisted in anger, his phone already in his hand as he barked into it, probably scrambling to cover his tracks. I stayed seated, my fists still clenched, my pulse still hammering. The lawyer closed the file slowly, then looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen all morning. Respect. "Jerry," he said carefully, "you understand what this means, don't you? The clause only triggers if we can prove misconduct." I nodded, my throat tight. "We can prove it. I know we can. You saw the records." He leaned forward. "The bank statements are strong, but Dustin will argue she authorized them. We need airtight proof, forensic evidence, expert testimony. If we're going to fight this, it has to be bulletproof." I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to steady my voice. "Then that's what we'll build." For the first time in years, I wasn't just the man on the defensive. I wasn't the father begging for understanding or the ex-husband drowning in regret. I was something else, something harder. The lawyer studied me for a moment before giving a small nod. "I'll bring in someone, a forensic accountant, the best I know. If there's dirt to be found, he'll find it." That's how I met Daniel Harper. He wasn't what I expected. No suit, no tie, no airs about him. Just a man in his 40s with rolled-up sleeves, glasses perched on his nose, and eyes sharp as scalpels. He shook my hand firmly, then got straight to the point. "Mr. Flores, I've looked over some of the preliminary records. What your son did wasn't sloppy. It was deliberate. Backdated documents, forged authorizations. He covered his tracks, but not well enough." Hearing it out loud made my chest tighten. "You're saying he forged Brianna's signature?" Daniel nodded grimly. "More than once. I've already flagged at least 3 transfers that were impossible for her to have authorized. She was hospitalized, heavily medicated, with nurses confirming she wasn't signing anything at the time." I pressed my hand to my mouth, fighting back a surge of nausea. Brianna, lying there weak, vulnerable, while our son drained her accounts behind her back. Daniel's voice softened slightly. "I know this is painful, but the good news is it's also prosecutable. Fraud, potential elder abuse. With the right evidence, the clause in her will doesn't just void his inheritance. It could bury him legally." The lawyer chimed in, his tone crisp and professional. "This won't just be about money. This will be about credibility, Jerry. We'll need witnesses, nurses, staff, maybe even friends who saw how Dustin behaved during those final weeks." I nodded, the fire in my chest burning hotter. "Then we'll get them, every last one." For the first time, I felt less like a victim and more like a man with a mission. I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for Brianna's memory, for the truth she hadn't been able to see because Dustin had poisoned her against me. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, surrounded by papers Daniel had given me. Bank statements, copies of signatures, notes about inconsistencies. It was overwhelming, but also strangely empowering. Every page was another piece of the puzzle, another nail in the coffin of Dustin's lies. I thought of my grandchildren, their small hands reaching for mine, their innocent laughter. I thought of Dustin's threat, the promise that he'd turn them against me. That image alone steeled my resolve. I couldn't let him win, not this time. For years I'd been silent. I'd let guilt eat away at me, let Dustin manipulate me, let Brianna drift away without ever fighting to hold her close. But this battle, I wouldn't lose this one. As I spread the evidence across the table, my hands stopped trembling. For the first time since Brianna's death, I felt something I thought I'd lost: control. Dustin thought he could bury me with lies, but now I had the tools to bury the truth deep enough to end him. Daniel Harper, the forensic accountant, had been working late nights on Brianna's files for over a week. Every morning, I woke up to new notes slid under my door, each one filled with neat handwriting and circled numbers that made my head spin. But nothing prepared me for the night he called and asked me to meet him in his office immediately. When I arrived, his desk was covered in spreadsheets, scanned signatures, and highlighted transactions. His eyes were sharper than I'd ever seen them. He didn't waste time with greetings. I could feel the shift in the room, the sympathetic glances from Brianna's relatives, the quiet judgment hanging in the air. Dustin straightened in his seat, his grin widening. To him, this was a coronation, his moment of victory. And then, as the lawyer reached for a sealed envelope at the bottom of the stack, I saw something flicker across my son's face. Not just arrogance, anticipation. He was waiting for something he believed would crush me completely. That was when it hit me. Maybe I wasn't the one about to be humiliated. Maybe the next words spoken in this room weren't the ones Dustin thought he'd hear. The next lines of Brianna's will looked ordinary enough, but I had no idea they were the thread that would unravel everything, and the reason my son's smirk would soon vanish from his face. When the lawyer's voice faded into the background, my mind slipped back to the beginning, the years when everything seemed possible. Before the bitterness, before the lies. "Jerry," he said, tapping a page with his pen, "I've found the smoking gun." I stepped closer, my heart pounding. "What is it?" He pushed the paper toward me. "A transfer, $2 million, moved out of Brianna's primary account 3 days before she passed." I stared at the numbers, the long string of digits, the date circled in red. 2 million. The words tasted bitter on my tongue. Daniel nodded grimly. "It was moved into a shell account linked to a holding company Dustin controls. I traced it through 3 layers of obfuscation. Clever, but not clever enough." I felt my stomach churn. 3 days before she died? Yes. Daniel leaned forward, his voice lowering. "And here's the part that seals it. The authorization form for the transfer was signed in Brianna's name. But according to hospital records, she was on a morphine drip at the time, barely conscious. There is no universe in which she could have signed that paper herself. My hand gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. The room seemed to tilt, the fluorescent lights buzzing like angry hornets in my ears. He slid a copy of the authorization across to me. I looked at the signature, shaky, uneven, but undeniably meant to mimic Brianna's. My throat tightened. This isn't her handwriting. Daniel shook his head. No, it's a forgery. And I've already confirmed it with 2 handwriting analysts. When this goes to court, it won't just be a civil issue. It'll scream fraud and elder abuse. The words landed like thunder. Elder abuse. That phrase carried a weight I couldn't shake. Dustin hadn't just stolen money. He had exploited his own dying mother, wrung her dry in her final days, like a parasite too greedy to wait for her to pass. I closed my eyes, fighting the bile rising in my throat. I remembered the last time I saw Brianna alive. She was weak, her voice soft, but her eyes still clear. "Take care of Dustin," she whispered. "Promise me." I had promised. God help me, I had promised. And now I knew what he'd been doing while she lay helpless, trusting him. I opened my eyes, my vision burning. "We take this to court, immediately." Daniel didn't hesitate. "I'll prepare the full report. Your lawyer can file motions. Dustin thinks this is about inheritance, but with this evidence, it's about criminal conduct. He's cornered." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My chest heaved, my fists clenched, and I realized I wasn't just angry anymore. I was done. Done with guilt. Done with hesitation. Done with hoping my son would turn back into the boy I once knew. He was gone, replaced by a man who forged his mother's name on her deathbed for money, and I was going to make sure the world knew it. I left Daniel's office with the forged document in my hand, its ink like a scar burning through my skin. Dustin thought he had buried me, but now I held the weapon that could bury him, and I swore I would not hesitate to use it. The day after Daniel uncovered the forged $2 million transfer, everything moved at lightning speed. My lawyer filed a formal challenge to the will, attaching the forensic findings and requesting an emergency hearing. What I thought would be a quiet, private process suddenly exploded into something far bigger. It started with a single headline in the local paper: "Millionaire's son accused of manipulating mother's estate." By noon, the story was everywhere: talk radio, online forums, even TV anchors reciting my family's pain between weather updates and sports scores. I hadn't wanted this. I never wanted Brianna's name dragged through the mud, her final days turned into clickbait. But Dustin left me no choice. He forged her signature. He robbed her blind. He twisted her memories of me. Silence would have meant surrender. Still, when I saw my face on the evening news, my stomach dropped. A reporter stood outside the courthouse, reading from a teleprompter. Sources close to the case confirm that Jerry Flores, the ex-husband of the late business magnate Brianna Flores, has filed legal motions accusing their son, Dustin Flores, of fraud and elder abuse in connection to her $34 million estate. Elder abuse. Hearing those words out loud, publicly, made me grip the arms of my chair until my knuckles turned white. I thought of Brianna, proud and strong, reduced in her final days to a pawn in our son's scheme. And I thought of Dustin, sitting in some bar or penthouse, watching the same news segment, realizing his empire of lies was starting to crumble. The phone calls began almost immediately. Old friends, neighbors, colleagues I hadn't spoken to in years. Some offered support, others wanted gossip. A few asked bluntly, "Is it true?" I kept my answers short. The court will decide. But inside, every question cut deep. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was a trial by public opinion, and Dustin was losing it. Within days, his polished image began to unravel. Country club memberships temporarily suspended, business associates distancing themselves, rumors that investors were pulling out of deals tied to his name. But he didn't go quietly. He fired back. His lawyers issued statements, calling me a bitter ex-husband, accusing me of trying to steal from my own son. Reporters shoved microphones in my face when I left my house. "Mr. Flores, is this about the money or about revenge?" I stopped once, staring straight into the camera. My voice was calm, steady. This is about justice. My ex-wife deserved peace in her final days. Instead, she was exploited. I won't let that stand. That clip went viral. For the first time, the tide seemed to shift in my favor. Comment sections filled with words like, "Good for him," "Stand your ground," "Justice for Brianna." But the support didn't erase the weight I carried. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I'd sit at the kitchen table, files spread out in front of me. Witness statements from nurses, handwriting analyses, financial trails Daniel had uncovered. Each page was proof, yes, but also a reminder of how far my son had fallen. And yet, I pressed on. Every signature, every dollar stolen, every lie Dustin told. It all became fuel for the fire that kept me awake, that drove me to fight harder. The first court date was set. My lawyer warned me, "Dustin will come after you harder than ever. He's desperate. Desperate men do reckless things." I nodded, sliding the forged transfer document back into its folder. Let him come. He's already crossed every line. He can't hurt me anymore. But even as I said the words, a flicker of unease lingered. Because deep down, I knew Dustin wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The headlines had named him a thief. The court had summoned him. And his allies were abandoning him. But Dustin was cornered now. And a cornered man is the most dangerous of all. The house was silent that night. The kind of silence that feels heavier than sound. Court filings were done, the media storm raged outside, and yet inside my walls, everything was still. Too still. I sat alone in the living room, a single lamp casting long shadows across the floor. Papers were scattered on the coffee table, bank records, legal documents, statements from witnesses, evidence of my son's betrayal, evidence of his crimes. I leaned back, closing my eyes, but the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with voices. "Dad, why can't you come to my game? You left us, Jerry. You left me. I'll make your grandchildren hate you." Dustin's words cut deeper than the forged signatures ever could. My chest ached, my throat burned. I had spent decades trying to be a father, to give him everything I never had. And still, somewhere along the line, I had failed. That was the thought I couldn't escape. Had I created this? Had I worked too much? Pushed too hard, made him feel invisible until the only thing he valued was money? Was this mess, the lies, the greed, the cruelty, just the harvest of seeds I had unknowingly planted? My hand pressed against my forehead as tears threatened. I whispered into the empty room, "Where did I go wrong?" Brianna's voice echoed in my memory, softer now, almost fragile. "He's not the boy we raised. Something's wrong with him." I had dismissed her at the time, told her she was tired, worried, seeing shadows where none existed. But now I knew she had been right. Something was wrong, and maybe I hadn't wanted to face it. The guilt pressed down like a weight on my chest. For years I had believed that sacrifice would buy love, that every hour at work, every missed dinner, every promotion chased for the sake of his future would prove my devotion. But what if sacrifice without presence only teaches entitlement? What if all Dustin ever learned from me was that love is measured in dollar signs? My fists clenched on my knees. Maybe this was my punishment. Maybe Brianna's final doubts about me, Dustin's contempt, the headlines painting our family as a tragedy. Maybe it was all the consequence of my mistakes. I sat there for hours, drowning in questions with no answers. The clock ticked past midnight. The lamp buzzed faintly. And then, somewhere between guilt and despair, something inside me shifted. I remembered Brianna's last words to me. "Promise me you'll take care of him." I had kept that promise for as long as I could. But taking care of someone doesn't mean enabling their destruction. It doesn't mean letting them rob, manipulate, and poison everyone around them. Sometimes taking care means drawing a line. Sometimes it means saying no. And Dustin needed to hear no, maybe for the first time in his life. Before the look of contempt I'd just seen in my own son's eyes. I was 25 when I met Brianna. She was brilliant, determined, and burning with an ambition I'd never seen before. I had calluses on my hands from long shifts at the factory, and she had textbooks filled with notes written in tiny, perfect handwriting. We were opposites, yet somehow we fit. From the very start, I believed in her dreams even more than my own. When she said she wanted to get her MBA, I didn't hesitate. I took on extra shifts, nights, weekends, holidays. I worked them all. There were days I'd come home with grease still under my nails, collapse on the couch for an hour, then head straight to the diner for another shift just to cover tuition. "You don't have to do this," she told me once, her eyes red from studying all night. "Yes, I do," I said, cupping her face in my rough hands. "Because if you succeed, we both succeed. That's how family works." And when Dustin was born, my sacrifices doubled. I stood, gathering the papers from the table, stacking them neatly. My hands had stopped shaking. The guilt didn't disappear, but it hardened into something stronger. A lesson. A weapon. I wasn't just fighting for me anymore. I was fighting for Brianna's legacy, for the grandchildren Dustin threatened to corrupt, for the truth that deserved to outlive us all. I looked out the window into the darkness, my reflection staring back at me. The man who gazed back wasn't broken anymore. He was resolved. Dustin thought guilt would paralyze me. Instead, it became the steel in my spine. Tomorrow, I would walk into that courtroom, not as a broken father, but as a man ready to end this war once and for all. The courtroom smelled of old wood and paper, a mixture of history and judgment. Rows of benches creaked as people shifted, waiting for the spectacle they knew this trial would be. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but that didn't stop the reporters from swarming the steps outside, microphones ready to catch every whisper. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside my lawyer, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Across from me, Dustin lounged in his chair, though the dark circles under his eyes betrayed sleepless nights. He still wore that smirk, the one I'd come to hate, as if this was just another performance where he would out-talk, outmaneuver, and outshine me. The judge entered, and the room rose. When we sat again, Dustin's attorney wasted no time. He painted Dustin as the devoted son, the caretaker who had managed finances in his mother's final days. His voice was smooth, rehearsed, dripping with sympathy. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said to the jury, "this is not a story of fraud. This is a story of a son stepping up when his mother needed him most. The opposing side wants you to believe otherwise, but the truth is simple. Dustin acted out of love." I clenched my jaw. Love? Forging her signature, draining her accounts, lying about me to her face. That was love? When it was our turn, my lawyer rose, his tone sharper, precise. He laid out the bank records, the forged documents, the forensic evidence Daniel had so carefully assembled. Every piece made Dustin shift uncomfortably, his smirk twitching. But we weren't finished, not by a long shot. The judge turned to my lawyer. "Do you have anything further to present?" "Yes, Your Honor," my lawyer said calmly. "We submit into evidence a recording, a statement from the late Mrs. Flores herself." The room froze. Even the judge's eyebrows rose slightly. "A recording?" Dustin's attorney scoffed. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." The judge raised a hand. "I'll allow it. Proceed." My lawyer pressed play. Brianna's voice filled the room, fragile yet unmistakably hers. I gripped the edge of the table, my heart pounding. "I need this recorded," her voice said, weary but clear. "Because I've begun to doubt my son. He pressures me about the will. He tells me things about Jerry, about how Jerry only visits for money. But I know my ex-husband, I know his heart, and I don't believe those lies." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Dustin's head snapped toward the speaker, his face draining of color. The recording continued. "If anyone ever tries to use my name or my signature without my consent, it is fraud. I want it known that I suspected my son might do such things. And if he does, let the record show I wanted my estate protected from him." The words hit like thunder. My chest tightened, not from pain this time, but from vindication. Brianna had known. She had seen through him, even in her weakened state. She had spoken the truth, and now that truth echoed through the walls of the court. Dustin slammed his hands on the table, his voice cracking. "She didn't mean that. She was sick. She didn't know what she was saying." The judge banged his gavel. Order in the court. But no order could erase what had just been revealed. The jury had heard it. The spectators had heard it. The truth was no longer hidden. I turned my head, meeting Dustin's frantic eyes. For the first time, he wasn't smirking. He wasn't confident. He was cornered, terrified, and I felt the scales of power tip, finally, irrevocably, in my favor. Brianna's voice still echoed in the courtroom when the recording clicked off. My son's mask had shattered. The battle wasn't over, but in that moment, I knew. Justice had finally spoken from beyond the grave. The recording ended, leaving the courtroom in stunned silence. You could have heard a pin drop. The weight of Brianna's words hung in the air, undeniable, unshakable. My son sat frozen beside his attorney, his face pale, his lips pressed into a thin line that trembled at the edges. The judge called for a recess. The gavel's crack echoed like a gunshot, and suddenly the room erupted in murmurs. People leaned toward each other, whispering. Reporters scribbled notes furiously. The bailiff barked for order as the jury filed out. I rose slowly, my knees stiff, my heart hammering. Before I could gather my papers, Dustin pushed back his chair with a screech. He didn't wait for his attorney. He didn't care about the eyes of the court. He came straight for me. "Dad," he hissed, his voice breaking, "you have to stop this." I turned to face him, and for a moment, I didn't see the entitled man who had poisoned his mother's final memories. I saw my son, the boy who once clung to my leg, who cried when I left for work, who used to tell me I was his hero. But that boy was long gone. Dustin's eyes glistened with tears he couldn't hide. His voice shook, cracking between words. "I did it all for us, for the family. Don't you get it? I was trying to protect what's ours. If you take this from me, you ruin everything." I stared at him, searching for sincerity, for a trace of the boy I once knew. But behind the tears, I still saw calculation. He wasn't sorry. He was desperate. "You forged her signature," I said quietly, each word like a stone dropping between us. "You stole from her when she could barely hold a pen. And you lied. About me, about her, about everything." His hands trembled. He reached out, gripping my sleeve like a drowning man. "Please, Dad, I can fix this. We can split it, 50-50. No one has to know. Just don't take it all away from me." I pulled my arm free, his grip slipping like water through my fingers. The contact left me cold. "Don't take it away?" My voice rose, sharp enough to cut. "Dustin, you already took everything. You took your mother's peace, her dignity, her trust. And now you expect me to hand you mercy?" His face crumpled, his mouth twisting into a plea. "I'm your son. Doesn't that mean anything?" For years, that question would have shattered me. For years, I would have bent, compromised, convinced myself that blood ties excused everything. But not now. Not after what he had done. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "Yes, you're my son. And that's the only reason I didn't call the police myself the night Daniel showed me the evidence. But don't mistake that for mercy. Family doesn't erase consequences." He flinched, his eyes darting as if searching for an escape. But there was none. The jury had heard Brianna's voice. The judge had heard it. The world outside these walls would soon hear it too. For the first time, I saw the truth hit him. He was going to lose. The bailiff approached, clearing his throat. "Sir, recess is over in 5. Dustin turned away, wiping his face, trying to compose himself. But the cracks in his armor were too wide, too deep. He wasn't the confident heir anymore. He was a man begging in the ruins of his own lies. As I watched my son stumble back to his seat, one thing became clear. This wasn't about saving him anymore. It was about saving everything he had tried to destroy, and the judgment that was coming would leave no room for mercy. The courtroom was packed when we returned from recess. Word had spread like wildfire about the forged transfers, the forensic findings, and most of all, Brianna's voice speaking from beyond the grave. The air buzzed with tension, every seat filled, every spectator craning to witness the moment the scales would tip. The judge rapped his gavel, his eyes stern. "We've heard the arguments, we've reviewed the evidence, and now we address the matter of the will, specifically the contingency clause." My breath caught. This was it. Brianna's last safeguard. The lifeline she'd left behind, buried like a seed waiting to sprout at exactly this moment. The judge's voice carried across the room, deliberate, powerful. "Mrs. Flores stated clearly that any attempt by her son, Dustin Flores, to manipulate her, misrepresent his father, or interfere with the lawful execution of her estate would result in forfeiture of his inheritance. Based on the evidence presented, fraudulent transfers, forged documents, testimony, and the decedent's own recorded words, this court finds that those conditions have been met." The words struck like a thunderclap. Dustin bolted upright. "No, you can't. This isn't fair. She wanted me to have everything. I'm her son. The judge's gavel slammed. Order! Sit down, Mr. Flores. But Dustin couldn't stop. His voice cracked, desperate, shrill. You're going to give it all to him? To my father? The man she divorced? This is insane. The judge adjusted his glasses, his face carved from stone. Mrs. Flores made her intentions abundantly clear. In the event of misconduct, the entirety of the estate transfers to her ex-husband, Jerry Flores. The clause is valid, enforceable, and binding. Brianna's consulting work demanded her evenings, so I learned to balance an infant in one arm and a stack of bills in the other. I made bottles, changed diapers, and whispered stories into his tiny ears. Stories about knights, kingdoms, and fathers who would do anything to protect their sons. Those nights were exhausting, but they were also the happiest of my life. I'd watch Dustin sleeping, his little fist curled around my finger, and I'd promise myself that he'd never know the same struggles I did. He'd never feel the sting of going without, the shame of bills piling higher than the paycheck. So I kept working. Every promotion I chased wasn't for me, it was for him. Every hour of overtime, every back-breaking shift, every dollar set aside for private schools, sports programs, and later, a college fund. I wanted to give him a life where he could walk through doors I'd never even been allowed to knock on. I thought I was building more than just security. Therefore, Dustin Flores is hereby disinherited. Gasps swept the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously. The spectators buzzed like a hive, their murmurs filling the space with electricity. I sat frozen, my heart hammering in my chest. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't process the weight of what had just been said. Then it hit me. Brianna had trusted me. In the end, after everything, the divorce, the distance, the poison Dustin had tried to pour into her heart, she had trusted me. She had chosen me. The judge's gavel cracked again. Effective immediately, the estate in its entirety transfers to Jerry Flores, to be administered under court supervision. Mr. Flores, you are the sole beneficiary. My chest tightened. $34 million. But more than that, a vindication money couldn't buy. My name restored, my integrity affirmed. Dustin staggered backward, his face twisted in horror. His attorney tried to calm him, but he shook free, pointing a trembling finger at me. This isn't over, Dad. You think you've won? You think this makes you the good guy? His voice broke into a scream. You'll regret this. I swear. You'll regret this. I stood slowly, my chair scraping the floor. My voice was calm, steady, deliberate. No, Dustin. I don't regret fighting for the truth. And one day, maybe you'll understand that this wasn't about punishment. It was about consequences. His eyes burned with hatred, but I didn't flinch. For once, I wasn't the one shrinking under his words. He was the one unraveling, the boy who thought himself untouchable now, standing in the ruins of his own making. The bailiff moved to escort him out as the judge adjourned. The gavel's final crack rang like the closing of a door that could never be opened again. The courtroom erupted in noise, but I heard none of it. All I could hear was Brianna's voice, echoing through my mind, her final act shielding me from the lies of the son we had raised. Dustin was finished, and the legacy he thought he controlled now belonged to me. When the gavel fell for the last time, I thought the worst was behind us. But I quickly realized the courtroom was just the beginning. By the next morning, the headlines blared across every paper and screen. Son disinherited after forging dying mother's signature. Flores family scandal, $34 million estate transferred to ex-husband. Dustin's name was everywhere, but not as the heir he imagined himself to be. He was a pariah, branded a liar, a fraud, an abuser of his own mother's trust. I watched it unfold from my kitchen table, the same spot where I had once wrestled with guilt. Now, the news anchors dissected every detail. They replayed clips from the courthouse steps, where Dustin had tried to push through reporters, his face twisted, his voice cracking. No comment, he'd shouted, but the cameras caught every second of his unraveling. By noon, the fallout spread faster than wildfire. His country club issued a statement, reviewing his membership. His so-called friends distanced themselves. The business partners he bragged about, they cut ties, their polished smiles replaced with silence. I thought of Brianna then, how much she valued her reputation, how carefully she built her empire brick by brick. Dustin had taken her name, her legacy, and dragged it through the mud. And yet, in a twist of irony, her final clause had ensured that he alone bore the weight of the shame. I went out once, just to feel the air on my face, and even strangers stopped me. Some nodded quietly, a gesture of solidarity. Others spoke up. "Good for you, sir. You stood up to him. She deserved better. You did the right thing." Their words warmed me, but they also carried a sting, because every reminder of Dustin's cruelty was also a reminder that he was still my son. No matter how much I tried to separate the two, blood doesn't wash away so easily. Still, justice demanded a reckoning, and that reckoning was merciless. I sat in my lawyer's office later that week, watching footage on his television. Dustin being escorted out of the courthouse after another hearing, reporters shouting questions. How does it feel to lose everything? Do you have anything to say about the fraud allegations? Did you steal from your dying mother? He kept his head down, his face pale, his once expensive suit rumpled. This was the same man who had strutted into the will, reading with arrogance dripping from every step. Now he was hollowed out, humiliated, exposed, and I felt no pity, not anymore. Because this wasn't just about Dustin losing money. This was about accountability, for Brianna, for me, for the grandchildren he had threatened to turn against me. The world now saw him for who he really was, and there was no undoing it. My lawyer clicked off the screen and leaned back. The clause worked exactly as she intended, but the publicity, that's its own punishment. He'll never recover socially. Financially, maybe, but reputations, those don't heal. I nodded, my jaw tightening. He wanted to destroy mine. Now he's watching his burn instead. That night I lay in bed, the hum of the city outside my window. For the first time in years, I felt light. Not because of the money. I would have given every cent to bring Brianna back. No, it was because the truth had won. Lies had been dragged into the light, and justice had been carved into the record for all to see. But as I drifted off to sleep, one final thought lingered like a shadow. Justice had been served, but the wreckage of family doesn't vanish overnight. Dustin's face, broken and desperate, haunted me. And I knew the resolution wasn't about watching him fall. It was about what I would do with the legacy Brianna had left in my hands. Dustin had lost everything, his inheritance, his reputation, his mask. But as the dust settled, one question remained. What would I build from the ashes of everything we'd torn apart? Barre, the storm had passed. The courtrooms were quiet now. The headlines had moved on, and the world no longer had my family's name on its lips. Dustin faded into the shadows, a ghost of the arrogant man who once believed himself untouchable. I no longer heard his voice on the news, no longer saw his face smeared across tabloids. The silence he left behind was its own form of justice. But silence is not the same as peace. I found myself walking through Brianna's old office one evening, long after the legal dust had settled. The space still carried her touch, the shelves lined with books, the faint scent of her favorite lavender candles, the framed diploma on the wall that I had once worked 3 jobs to help her earn. I ran my fingers along the desk where she had built her empire, tears welling in my eyes. This was her true legacy, not the millions, not the business deals. It was her vision, that hard work, determination, and fairness could build something that mattered. And I knew what I had to do. I met with her former colleagues, the few who still spoke of her with reverence instead of scandal. I told them my idea, the Brianna Flores Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to scholarships for women chasing higher education, especially those who, like Brianna once had, needed someone to believe in them. The lawyers raised eyebrows when I committed a large portion of the estate to the foundation. "Are you sure, Jerry? You don't have to do this." But I was sure. For the first time in years, I felt certain. Brianna built her life on opportunity, I told them. I want her name to give that opportunity to others. That's how she'll live on. And so we began. The paperwork was filed, the funds allocated, and soon the first scholarship recipients were selected. I sat in the audience at that inaugural ceremony, watching young women step onto the stage, their eyes bright with hope. They spoke of dreams, of becoming doctors, lawyers, leaders, and in every one of them, I saw a glimmer of Brianna. My grandchildren were there too, sitting beside me, clapping proudly. They leaned their heads against my shoulders, innocent and uncorrupted by the lies their father had tried to plant. In their smiles, I saw proof that truth had prevailed. For the first time in years, I wasn't haunted by guilt. I wasn't consumed by anger. I was at peace. Later that evening, I visited the small garden where Brianna had once loved to sit with her tea. I placed a single white rose on the bench, my voice quiet but steady. "We did it, Brianna," I whispered. "He tried to tarnish everything you built. But in the end, your voice was stronger than his lies, and your legacy will outlast us both." The breeze rustled the leaves as if answering back, and I closed my eyes, letting the peace wash over me. Dustin's downfall had been public, brutal, and deserved. But my victory wasn't in watching him lose. It was in choosing what to do with what remained. I thought I was building love, loyalty, and gratitude. But memory has a cruel way of rewriting itself in moments like these. Sitting in that law office, I could almost hear Dustin's teenage voice echoing through the years. "Dad, why can't you come to my game? You're always working." How could I explain to him that the only reason I wasn't in the bleachers was because I was breaking my back to pay for those cleats on his feet? That every hour I missed in his childhood was an hour invested in his future? I closed my eyes and saw Brianna again. Her in that navy blue graduation gown, the way she ran into my arms after walking the stage. She had tears in her eyes, and I'll never forget what she whispered. "I couldn't have done this without you." At the time, those words made the sacrifices worth it. Now, decades later, they stung like salt on an open wound. Because Dustin would never know how much I gave. Or maybe he did know, and he simply didn't care. In taking pain and turning it into purpose, in turning betrayal into justice and justice into hope. And as I stood there in the fading light, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. Forgiveness. Not for Dustin. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But for myself. I had done what I needed to do. I had fought for the truth. I had honored Brianna. And I had given our story an ending she would be proud of. Brianna's voice had saved me in the courtroom, but it was her spirit that saved me afterward. And as I watched the next generation step into the world with her name guiding them, I knew revenge was only the beginning. Renewal was the real victory. I let out a slow breath, realizing something I'd been avoiding. I had spent so much of my life providing for my family that I never stopped to protect my place in it. I thought love was secured by sacrifice, that loyalty was automatic when you gave everything you had. But watching Dustin sneer at me in that office, I finally understood. Sacrifice doesn't guarantee loyalty. Sometimes it only feeds entitlement. A cold wave washed over me as the truth settled in. Everything I'd poured into my family, the nights, the money, the years, hadn't built love. It had built a weapon, and my own son was pointing it straight at me. Brianna was always meant for more than the small town we started in. I knew at the moment I first saw her stand up in a crowded diner and tell the manager that refusing to hire women was discrimination. Her voice didn't shake. She didn't back down. People turned their heads, and I remember thinking, this woman will change the world. And she did. What began as late-night consulting jobs at our kitchen table grew into something I couldn't have dreamed of. First, a local client, then another. By the time Dustin was old enough for middle school, Brianna's one-woman operation had turned into a firm with employees, contracts, and a name people respected. I was proud of her, so proud that I told anyone who would listen. "That's my wife," I'd say, chest swelling. "She built this from scratch." But pride has a way of souring into distance when the hours grow longer. She came home later and later, her phone buzzing with messages even as she walked through the door. Business dinners replaced family dinners. Strategy meetings replaced movie nights. At first, I told myself it was temporary, that once the business was stable, she'd come back to us, back to me. But success doesn't slow down. It only accelerates. The more she achieved, the further away she seemed to drift. We stopped talking about our days, our dreams,